Welcome to RITE Richmond, everyone. This is a new broadcast to explore political issues in Richmond. We often don't see what's going on in council other than what you see publicly, and we want to explore issues a little more to give you some deeper understanding of what actually takes place behind the decisions behind the decisions, if you want. So this is going to be an ongoing segments we're going to be putting together, and I want to have a number of people on these on this program. Starting tonight, we're honored to have Councilor Carol Day, third term councilor on the city of Richmond. And she's a strong advocate for within the city, has been for a long time, has lived here a long time, and we want to welcome her to our show tonight.
Thank you very
Welcome,
much.
Carol. Yeah.
Thank.
So starting with, yeah, I just wanted to ask you sort of what drives you to get up in the morning to do the job of being a city councilor?
Well, I have the best job in the whole wide world, and I absolutely love meeting people. I love helping people. There's often things that they need information about or connections I need to make. And whenever I can connect people to a service or help people with a problem, or maybe calm their fears over something that they may have misconceptions about, that gives me incredible joy. And I feel proud that have the ability to do this job.
Yeah, great. And I know talking to others that you're a counselor that gets back to everybody on every email, it seems. And I'm not sure all counselors do that. But I certainly hear from people out there that they say that you're one who gets back to them always. And that's great to hear. Let's move on to another question. So what keeps you up at night thinking about things? You know, we all have things that kind of stew around our head sometimes that we go, geez, I wish I could just sort of fix this or resolve this. And I'm just curious for people tuning in, what is it that keeps you up at night?
Well, honestly, it's usually if I've done the research, which I do a lot of research, and I know that a vote should go one way or another, and I can't get the votes on council. And I try to lobby everybody and let them know what I know to see if I can sway their mind. But sometimes it's people just don't want change. And an example of that is for years I complained and complained about the lack of transparency at the Oval with the finances, and I just couldn't get the votes to do a proper, investigation and to make changes.
Mm.
And that was very frustrating to me. Well, eventually it happened, but that kept me up at night.
Okay, well, thanks. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of challenging issues like that that some people may have aren't aware of are going on, and we're going to get to some of those here in a moment. But first, let's talk about briefly what do you like best about Richmond and the city of Richmond as a community?
I think Richmond is the perfect size community because we have enough people living here and enough resources that it doesn't matter what you want to do. If you want to go to a play or a concert or go hiking or row on the Fraser River or go for a nature walk or you go swimming or take an exercise class, it's all here in Richmond. And there are very few communities that have the amenities that we have. But the best part about Richmond is the kaleidoscope of people who live here. So we have people from so many different parts of the world, and that makes our culture very diverse and multicultural. And I think a good example of that is the Highway to Heaven, where you've got multiple different religious institutions side by side by side. And not only do they tolerate each other, they help each other, and they've created their own society, and they actually work together to plan their yearly calendar, to share parking lots, to share resources, and to help one another. And that gives me an enormous amount of pride. And so whenever people ask me where I'm from, I say I live in Richmond, BC, one of the best communities in the province of British Columbia. And I'm never moving.
Yeah. Well, that's great to hear, and yeah, I know that area, and I know those organizations are wonderful. I've been to quite a number of them, and they certainly do work together to support the community. I know from an emergency management point of view, often they jump in when the city has emergencies to help out, and they show up at the most difficult times often for our community, and that's sort of wonderful to see quite often. So thanks. Want to move on to a couple sort of meatier issues here. And one I want to talk about, briefly is around taxes. the city's proposing a 5.8% tax increase, and that's, about $128 for an average residential property with assessed value of 1.3 million, right? And again, things are going up, life is expensive, and we're seeing inflation. So I'm just wondering if you can share a little insight into, how council came up with this increase that help the voters, help the residents and of Richmond understand what you're doing to keep this down and how you landed on that particular number.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. The budget is one of the biggest jobs that a counselor will get involved with, and we work very closely with our staff. And when we're doing the budget, I think it's important for people to know that there are certain costs we have little or no control over. For example, like water and sewer rates come from Metro Vancouver, so whatever they pass on to us, we have no choice but to pass on to the taxpayer. And the same is said for RCMP, for example. The increases in wages that they get are set down by the higher ups in RCMP. So we just have to absorb that. And when it comes to the unions, whether it's the QP union or the firefighters union, we have to give the same wage increases on par as to what other Metro Vancouver cities are giving. So that again ties our hands. Now, where we have some flexibility is levels of service. And this particular tax increase, we, excuse me, made a decision to keep the same level of service. Sorry. Sorry, just getting over a cold.
Certainly, understandable.
But then capital projects are a really important part of taxes. And we had decided to create a new Steveston Community Center and library. It's going to be magnificent, but it costs $96 million. That's how we got the tax increase.
So let me ask you a question on that because some people have said, the Steveston and certainly needed in Steveston, long overdue for a new community center and the like. But I've heard some people say it's sort of gold plated. And I'm wondering, if you can give us a little insight into that. Did it have to be so expensive?
Mm. I ask that same question every time, Jerome. How the heck can this cost $1 million and that cost $2 million, that cost 90 million? And we send out tenders on BC Bid. And so a number of companies will come in and make an offer to build the project, whatever the project is. And I'll be darned if they're not within 5%. It just costs what it costs. And when it comes to the Steveston Community Center, it is long overdue. And, I think that if we're not going to do it right, there's no point in doing it. And I don't think it's gold plated. I think it is definitely been enlarged to serve more people. But, we also can't build, I'm sorry, a a modular unit. It's got to be something that's going to last for the next 50 years or more longer. And so we've gone with a really good project that's a little bigger than what we originally planned because we had to plan for the future. And as you know, many more people are moving to Steveston. And I think it's very important that they have the services. And, if you talk to someone who lives in one of our neighboring communities, they have a really hard time getting into, swimming classes or, macrame classes or art classes or exercise or even into the library. People in Richmond don't have that problem for the most part. We can accommodate most people, but we need the space to do it. And that's going to solve that problem.
Hmm. Yeah, I look forward to it. It looks like it'll be certainly a nice facility. Like you say, well overdue for the community. So for people who say, why didn't you hold the line on taxes this year? Like, why didn't we just come up with like 0 or 1 or 2%? Because everyone's struggling right now with high inflation. We're seeing food go up, housing go up, rents go up. And so what would you say to people who say, couldn't you just hold the line this year on it?
Well, if it wasn't for the increases in, well, we needed a new fire truck. That's $1 million. Right off the bat, the old fire truck was well past its usable age. It had to be replaced. We needed more police officers because we're dealing, with homeless, and we don't want to just, forget the problem, ignore the problem. We must deal with these safety issues head on. And when it comes to things like road improvements. I mean, we have some of the best road system in all of Metro Vancouver. I mean, you drive to some communities, you got potholes everywhere. I mean, it's $128 per household. I know that's a lot of money to some people, but if it's a senior, for example, and that $128 is just too much, then they can defer those taxes and pay 1% interest. And so we do have options for a number of people in our community that are vulnerable to defer that $128 if they feel they just can't manage it. But if you ask the average person who goes to the community center whether they'd like to have a new, machine in the gym, or maybe a movable wall to create more space in an activity room, they'd say, yeah, let's do it, let's build it, but it costs money. And we've been able to keep our taxes quite low. Now, having said that, the one issue I dealt with was this 1% of that tax increase is a deferral to reserves. And every year I look at that. Should we do it or should we not do it? And in the past, I've made motions to either eliminate the 1% or to reduce it to 0.5%, depending on what is going on in the community. But because we've got some rather large capital projects, especially Stevenson, I decided this year to support the 1% to reserves. And there are times when it is 100% necessary. And that reserve account is growing and growing and growing. It pays us a great deal of interest. And in the end, it gives us the ability to basically borrow money much cheaper because we have all this money in reserves. So that was the only thing I personally struggled with, was the 1%. But the rest of it is completely justifiable due to the increases that came down from Metro Vancouver and all the other expenses that I mentioned earlier.
Okay. Yeah, that 1%, maybe some people will say this is the year to pass on it and freeze that. But like you say, difficult choices. And if the city is relying on that fund to fund projects, there might be a cost to that. So
And I wouldn't be surprised if next year I vote to defer that 1%, because I think then we will have caught up on some of these big expenditures. But this year was one of those years that, we just needed the money.
yeah, because some people might say, the more money you have in there, well, the more you're going to spend, because it's sitting there. I don't know if that's true or not, but it certainly may be a temptation when you've got a pot of money that's sitting there, to find projects to spend it on.
Well, I think what we try to do is, and I'll give diking as an example, we'll build the dike bigger if the feds are going to kick in the money. Now, often these programs can come up actually quite last minute. And so we have one of the best dike systems in Canada because we've been able to take advantage of the grant money that's out there, because we are an island and we are at sea level and we must maintain our dikes. So having those funds available for those projects when they become available is, the only smart thing to do, because if you can't match funds, you don't get the grant. And we're talking multi-million-dollar grants. And it's worth it to be ready with shovel-ready projects that you can jump on when funding miraculously becomes available, because that's how federal and provincial government works.
Yeah, so I'm hearing, you need some of that money ready to go for these projects in order to get the match from other levels of government often. And if you don't have that ready to go,
But
then you won't get the match to get the projects going.
yeah, another very good example of that is the Stevenson Harbor Authority, has a huge inlet in there, and we have to dredge that harbor. Right now, there's only 6 feet of draft. So some of these big fishing boats can't get in and out. So the city had to cough up, I think it was about $2 or $3 million. And then the feds, the province, and the Stevenson Harbor Authority also kicked in. And because we had that money sitting in our coffers, we were able to jump on the opportunity and push for the opportunity when we realized how badly we needed it. And this is a major safety issue for these fishermen. And we have the most important, busiest fishing harbor on the west coast of North America. So dredging is pretty important.
So, well, let me ask you this then, why is that a city issue? Shouldn't that be the province and the federal government taking care of that?
Yeah, great question, Jerome. Previously, basically the no, sorry, the Vancouver port system, Port Vancouver would have paid all of that. But about 10 years ago or so, they absolutely cut funding for dredging. And it's been an ongoing battle for the last 10 years. And it's gotten to the point where it's so dangerous that we had no choice but to push all of the partners to be part of this solution. And so the feds did cough up 1/4 of the money, but they should have done 100%. But we can't allow our fishermen to be risking their lives trying to get in and out of the harbor. So we were able to convince the provincial government, it's not really their job, but they came up with a quarter of the money. The harbor, did a great job of raising money through fees, and then we did the last quarter. So it's an example of how we as a city must work with all levels of government to accomplish the services that we need here in Richmond.
Yeah, so is that another example of downloading from senior levels of government onto the city? I know on a number of areas, and we'll probably touch on these both tonight and in future. A lot of these areas seem to get more and more offloaded to local governments and hence stuck onto the residents and taxpayers of Richmond. Um,
Yeah, you're not wrong, Jerome. And we could argue this till the cows come home, and you're not wrong. And but at the same time, do we just say, well, then we're not doing it, and then we have a big fuel spill in the harbor of Steveston, because a boat has tipped over? It's an example of trying to work the best we can with the higher levels of government. And another example of that is, of course, is housing, especially affordable housing. If we don't provide some incentive, they're not going to put us on the list. So we have to work with them. It's just the way government works these days.
hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, it's good to see you working with different levels of government to try and move these certainly projects forward.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's one of the reasons that I built some really great relationships with our MPs and MLAs, and having really, frank conversations with them and letting them know this is a deal breaker. We need this, and they listen.
Yeah, that's good. Building those relationships is important, eh?
Nope.
And yeah, you've been around a little while on council to make a lot of that happen, right? Um, let's move on to another sort of big topic of the last year, and that is safe consumption sites. Oh, it was very controversial last year. We saw a record number of people come out to City Hall to speak. And there was a lot of information and maybe misinformation circulating too at the time. Some of it may be driven by the provincial election that would happen last fall. But anyway, I wanted to get your thoughts on it. It was a big topic and sort of give us some flavor of what happened from your perspective as a counselor.
Yeah, that was a very difficult time in City Council and City Hall. So let's be clear. What we were asking, what the motion was, very simple. To the Vancouver Coast Health Authority, do you think that there should be a safe consumption site at the hospital? That's it. The Vancouver Coastal Health Authority came back in time about a week later and said, nope, Richmond does not need one. And the reason is we only had 26 people die here in Richmond, whereas in Port Moody, they had 56 people die. They need one, you do not. So that was the motion. Now, what happened? Why did we have 1,000 people with signs standing outside of City Hall? Because some wannabe politicians took advantage of how naive these people were and told them we were giving drugs to children. The provincial government was giving drugs to children. This is not true. They told them that we wanted to have drug addicts all over Richmond. This is not true. We were just asking the provincial health authority if they thought it would be a good idea. And these wannabe politicians use this issue to take advantage of some very vulnerable people. And, that was really horribly unfair to those people.
So thanks. You mentioned, 26 people died in Richmond. Those are 26 lives lost. And so doesn't that justify, a safe consumption site or whatever else is necessary in order to stem this crisis and resolve this somehow, make some impact on it?
Well, you would think so, but keep in mind the Vancouver Coast Health Authority are the experts. We're not. We're just asking questions. What they determined was that most people were dying at home. So they weren't dying in the street and all that. They were dying at home. So what they felt, we needed more outreach workers and more counseling and more opportunities for people to get help and go into detox. So we agreed with that.
Yeah, my understanding was that it was Coastal Health, who as part of their plan had the potential of a safe consumption site to begin with. And it didn't actually start with the city. It started with, as you mentioned, looking to the provincial health authorities on it, or yeah, and asking them what can be done. And part of that bigger comprehensive planning was the potential of a safe consumption site.
Yeah.
And that's, am I correct or am I wrong with
No, you're
what?
absolutely right. We had a letter from our health officer, Dr. Dewara, and she supported the idea of a safe consumption site. And that's what led to the initiative for us to write the letter to ask if that's something that we should move forward with. But then Vancouver Coastal Health Authority didn't agree with our chief medical officer. And so subsequently they said, no, that's not appropriate for Richmond. In other places it is, but not in Richmond. We want to see more counseling, more outreach, more rehab opportunities. And so we have, we defer to the professionals.
Yeah, so it sounds somewhat like a more an issue between the chief health officer and Vancouver Coastal Health, if you want, or Vancouver Coastal Health and the provincial government.
Well,
Or they-
it became an election issue, and the province decided to take a deeper look, which, I can't blame them. And but I think there isn't a health officer anywhere in the world that's not going to say having a consumption site is a smart thing to have. But can you justify it? And if honestly, if the numbers aren't there and the way people are overdosing isn't there, then it makes more logical sense to put more money into counseling, into getting people into rehab, and providing more supports. So that's what they, in their wisdom, chose to do. And so we have to abide by that.
So what's Richmond doing to support exactly that? If we're not having that safe
Mm.
consumption site, what action is the city taking in order to provide these other supports? Although really, again, it falls more on the provincial government to be doing this. But again, the offloading to the city means, we Richmond is left with people in the streets, people camping in parks, etc. And so I'm just wondering what the city is doing differently moving forward to try to address these concerns.
Well, I'm really glad you asked that question, but we need a half-hour podcast just to discuss all that we're doing. Um, we have done everything, and in fact, I just talked to our chief of police yesterday about this. I said, what more can we do than the peer programs, than the Fox 80 program, than the Foundry program, by the sending police officers out to the schools to play, to the high schools and the elementary schools to connect with students and see the ones that are vulnerable, reaching out to people, having drop-in centers. I mean, I could go on and on and on about the things that just Richmond is doing. I mean, it's unbelievable, the services that we have. And our police chief said there isn't anything more that he could think of at this time that we could do. And I said, how do we compare to other cities? And he goes, oh, we're doing far more than many of the other cities. So we are doing everything we can to combat drug use. And we will not stop until this problem is fixed. And we have hired more outreach workers that go out in the evening and at night to find people and get them into a shelter. We have all kinds of counselors. We hired a new manager. We've got a drop-in center at Brickhouse Park during the day, and then at night that becomes a shelter. In the wintertime, we have a temporary shelter at South Arm Pool that operates all night long. And then we've managed to get more funding from BC Housing to have Salvation Army, Ironwood shelter have, I think, six or eight more beds, and rotating people through and getting them into housing. Like, we're working hard on this issue. We probably spend more time on homeless and these issues than anything else right now.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for those insights. Certainly in future we'll probably be talking more about supportive housing and the like, because housing is a big issue, and especially around this, as you say. Let's I want to ask you what, going forward. We've got an exciting year. We're at the beginning of 2025 here. And I want to ask you what are the three most impactful topics that council's working on for this year in your view? I'm sure there's many topics, but what do you think are, maybe the top three that residents should be aware of that city's working hard on?
Yeah, well, not to be cheeky, but housing, housing, housing. Housing is number one. And trying to find ways to create more affordable housing, more rental housing, and more housing options. And with Bill 44 being passed by the province of British Columbia, it's really changed the game. We've had to rewrite our OCP. We're still working on it, and our official community plan. That is really number one, because we have one of the lowest vacancy rates in Richmond, and there just aren't enough places for people to live. So trying to find ways to densify in a way that will enhance the neighborhood as opposed to hurt a neighborhood. So, for instance, at all the arterial roads, we're densifying with townhouses or fourplexes. And then in community hubs like, Shelmont Mall, or over at, right now we're doing Williams and number 3 mall there, and putting in a tower at the corner. It's only 6 stories, but still densifying that area around community hubs where there's shopping and bus and transit. So that's definitely number one. Keeping taxes low. I'm an absolute conservative when it comes to maintaining fiscal responsibility. I'm not a fan of just huge tax increases and having huge slush funds. I think it's very important that we spend our taxpayers' dollars wisely. So keeping taxes fair and below the medium is number two for sure. And then safety is always a concern. Richmond is a very conservative city, and there's a lot of people that are very worried about crime. And so making sure that they understand the services that are available, how to contact the RCMP or fire when they have an emergency, and keeping them safe and feeling secure. While we have one of the lowest crime rates, it's either the lowest or second to lowest in all of Metro Vancouver, there's a perception out there by so many people that, oh, it's not safe to walk down the street. It's just not accurate. I mean, if you live a normal life and don't, hang around with drug dealers, the chances of you having a violent crime affect you is almost zero. So, but people still are antsy and nervous. And so our job as counselors is to do two things. One is to educate and show people how they can access the services when they need them. And two is to help calm the nerves of people who are reacting to what they've read on YouTube or Twitter, or one of those social media platforms where people will use fear and mistruths to get people to listen to them. And it's grossly unfair, but that does happen.
Yeah. Well, thanks. So housing, taxes, and public safety, those are three things we're going to check in with you later throughout the year here and see how those things are going. So as we start to wrap this up, I just want to open it up to you in the last portion here to share with viewers sort of anything you would like to share with them, anything you want them to think about or consider. Really want to give it over to you for a couple minutes because I've asked you a number of difficult topics here to share about, but I want to give you a little space here to share anything top of mind for you with residents.
Well, thank you. I think for me, I live in an amazing neighborhood. I have wonderful neighbors, and I'm very fortunate. There's a lot of people who don't know their neighbors, don't even know their name, don't know what kind of car they drive. And I would love to bring people together so that they can create mini neighborhoods within the larger neighborhoods, not just because it makes you feel good, but it's a safer environment, and it just creates more continuity. So what we're doing in the city of Richmond, we did kind of a sit down with a bunch of seniors in Broadmoor shopping area, and then also in another neighborhood. And the whole point was to have 4 or 5 sessions where these seniors get together and talk about what their issues are. And then we hear, like, do they need a longer crosswalk light to get across the road? Do they need more transportation? Do they need more access to the community center? But just asking them all these little questions to get them to be engaged. And then now they've become active members of the community. And we do the same thing with Block Watch. People want to feel safe in their neighborhoods. So having a Block Watch in your neighbors brings you together. They often have phone lists or WhatsApp groups, and they all talk to each other. And if they spot anything, they talk, hey, who owns that blue car? And then someone will say, oh, that's my nephew. Don't worry, nothing to worry about. Like it just creates that the neighborhood feel that I grew up with in Richmond. And I think if people would just open literally their doors and get to know their neighbors, I think that would really create a better quality of life for everyone. So that's important to me. Also, educating people about the services that are available. I mean, it's our job to create the services to maintain the neighborhoods that exist, whether it's paving the roads or painting the lines on the sidewalk or hiring more police officers. That's our job as counselors, and letting people know how they can communicate with me, particularly because like I get emails, as you mentioned earlier, I answer all of them. And I found out, there's like on Kitty they needed a pedestrian crosswalk. Okay, let's make that happen. I found out that seniors couldn't get across Granville Avenue to the MCAL, to the Community Center for Active Living, because it was too far. They needed a bench in the middle so they could rest in between lights. And those are the kind of little wee issues that I deal with all the time. And I learned so much from the people of Richmond, and I'm so grateful that they're willing to take the time to talk to me and tell me their issues so that I can address them. So that makes me look really good as a counselor because I get the job done, but I couldn't do it without the people of Richmond sharing their concerns with me. So that's super important to me. And every person who lives in Richmond is a valuable member of our society. And I don't care if that's someone that's a student. And I was just appointed to the Youth Advisory Committee, which is a brand new committee. These young people have got so much to say. And it's so exciting to hear their ideas for the future. And same with the seniors. I'm on the Seniors Advisory Committee meeting. And the seniors have like a lifetime of life experience, and they share that with me, and then I learn so much from them. And to me, that's invigorating and exciting, and it helps me do a better job. But I lived here since I was 4 years old. I got married here. I bought my first house, second house, third house here. I raised three wonderful children in Richmond, very committed to the city. And what people may not know is before I became a Richmond City Councilor, I was a community advocate. And a number of the big projects that I worked on, well, number one for me is the Garden City lands. That was 136 acres that was going to be plowed over with major high rises on it. And myself and five other people sat around a kitchen table and said, we can't let this happen. So we managed to get the city, I was not a councillor at the time, we got the city to vote to buy the Garden City lands and create one of the best, beautiful nature areas in all of Richmond.
Yeah,
And
it certainly is. And I've seen go by there almost every day. And I see it coming together and continue to grow and be used by more and more people.
yeah,
As we wrap this up for this episode, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing the insights on these issues. For those tuning in and watching, in future, we're going to have other people on the show, other counselors as well. And we want to gain those further insights because so little is shared by just watching online council meetings. And we want to get some insights behind the decisions on a lot of these important topics. So thanks for tuning in. My name's Jerome Dickey, and I look forward to seeing you again in an upcoming episode very shortly.
all
Take
right.
care, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for all your work on this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Carol, for your 3 terms on council serving the city. We appreciate that, and we look forward to having you back on in future.
Thank you.
All the best. Take care.